guys, welcome back to Cool Movie Ratings, and if you've watched my channel for a long time, you know that I'm a die-hard Stranger Things fan. It's my all-time favorite TV show, and I recently just binged the whole series in about the last 3 weeks, and so I absolutely have it on my mind, and I've been watching some videos on YouTube about, like, the behind-the-scenes, because I haven't watched that kind of stuff in a while, and I got a recommendation for a video on my recommendations tab, and I looked at it, and it was a title tease for Stranger Things Season 2, where it would go over all the titles, and I think it was made only like a month, or even if that, after like the show had its first season come out. So I had nothing better to do. It was only about a minute long. I clicked on it, and I was kind of shocked at what I saw. I think only 2 of the titles stayed in the actual show, and one of them kind of changes like what Season 2 could have been like. So since it's only a minute long, I'll play that 1 minute clip of all the titles of Season 2, what they were supposed to be, and I'll give my thoughts afterwards on how Stranger Things Season 2 could have been a lot different. After the clip, I'll go over how these could have like drastically changed how Season 2 of Stranger Things might have went, because one of these titles had me like, whoa, how have I never seen this before, and how do people not talk about this? So yeah, here is the title tease for Stranger Things Season 2. So yeah, as you can see, only 2 of the titles would end up being used for Season 2 of Stranger Things, and I'm going to decipher what these titles mean because it's kind of obvious, except one of them, honestly. But yeah, so we'll go from Episode 1 all the way to Episode 9, and I'll give my thoughts on each of the titles and talk about what they actually mean and stuff like that. So let's start with Episode 1. The first episode of Season 2 of Stranger Things is called Mad Max, and in the trailer it was also called Mad Max. That is the easiest one. It was always Mad Max from the start, and there's not really anything else I need to talk about here. Episode 2 in the trailer was The Boy Who Came Back to Life, and in the show it was Trick or Treat Freak. This really isn't a change, and it won't change the story at all because they're both basically the same exact thing, because Trick or Treat Freak is talking about how Will is a freak because he came back to life. He's the boy who came back to life, and that's what that meant. So they just went with a different way of like emphasizing how Will is seen as a freak since he came back to life. With Episode 3, we have kind of a dilemma here, which I'll mention real quick. The actual episode in the show is called The Polywog, but on the trailer, The Polywog wasn't a title until a later episode, so I'll talk about that when that episode comes. But in the actual show, it was called The Polywog because that is the episode where Dustin really investigates what he found, which ends up being a Demodog. And the original trailer was the Pumpkin Patch, and we know that this is obviously the Pumpkin Patch that Hopper investigates, and then he realizes there's a whole hive mind underneath the pumpkin patches. So that one is really easy to decipher also. Episode 4 is the only case where I don't really know what they were talking about, because the episode in the trailer, or the name in the trailer, was The Palace, and I don't really know what the palace could be. Meanwhile, in the show, the episode was called Will the Wise, which makes more sense because it's more focused on Will, even though the palace would probably be a cooler name. So I think that might have been maybe a plot point that never saw the light of day. I don't really know. It just didn't really make sense with anything that was going on, or maybe I'm just not looking into it close enough. But Episode 4, that's the only one I don't really understand and can't really decipher. Episode 5, the name of the trailer was The Storm, which makes a lot of sense to me, which I'll explain in a second. And then the name in the show was Dig Dug, which makes a little bit of sense also, But the storm makes more sense, obviously, because if you've seen Stranger Things Season 2, you know that the main villain is the Mind Flayer, and he's just a big storm. He looks like a giant, like, cloud. And that's probably what they meant by the storm, because I believe that this is the episode that Will gets turned into the Mind Flayer, and you see that giant, like, cloud thing take over his body. And Dig Dug also makes sense, because I'm pretty sure that this is one of the episodes where Joyce and Bob and or Hopper are digging, and they find the hive mind. I'm pretty sure that's the episode where Hopper gets taken down and he gets trapped there, so that's probably what they meant by Dig Dug. But I think this storm would have been a better title. But Dig Dug, it's another callback to the first episode when they were all playing Dig Dug in the arcade. So episode 6 was supposed to have the title The Pollywog, but then that got changed to episode 3. And episode 6 in the show ended up being called The Spy, which makes a lot of sense at this point because Will's a spy, and they find that out he's the Mind Flayer's spy. Like, if you've seen the show, you obviously understand he can spy on everything because the Mind Flayer's using him. So I don't really have an explanation there. They just, I guess that they maybe they were going to focus more on Dart in this episode rather than earlier on, because he doesn't really get much more importance, I would say. So maybe the script was a little bit different and stuff happened later and other stuff happened earlier. Who knows? Episode 7 is the most hated episode of Stranger Things. The Lost Sister is what it's called in the show, and it's about 11. She leaves Hopper's cabin and she goes and finds I think it's 7, and her name is Kali, and she also has powers, and that's basically that episode. It completely ignores everything that happened in the previous episode, and it's its own episode. But the original title was The Secret Cabin. So we can see that the Duffer Brothers, I'm guessing they didn't plan for this episode to happen, episode 7, and you'll see in a second where it was supposed to happen instead. And the secret cabin is obviously referring to Hopper's cabin. He has it fortified so no one can get in and see 11, so that one makes sense to decipher. Episode 8 in the show was called The Mind Flayer, and this is my favorite episode of the entire show because of that opening, I think 20 minutes. It's just the greatest part of the entire show, where they have to escape the lab. I love that whole entire scene. But in the trailer, it was originally called The Brain, and I guess that kind of could make sense because they probably figure out, in that episode, they figure out how the Mind Flayer works, and they kind of figure that out in the episode 8 that we have, and so I'm guessing that's where that was, that's why that was called The Brain. But yeah, that's another kind of weird one that's kind of simple, The Brain, and I'm glad that they changed it into the Mind Flayer because that's a lot cooler. Episode 9 is the one that I really wanted to talk about because in the show it was called The Gate, which makes sense because she closes the gate, obviously, but in the trailer it was called The Lost Brother. So they were gonna do the same stuff probably with what they did with 7 and Kali, but a brother. So I think that this is where they got the idea of Henry and 1. I think that this might have been when they first thought of the character. They didn't think of him as Vecna at that point because I don't think the Duffer Brothers originally thought that Vecna would be in the show, because a lot of people have posted about a scene at the beginning of the show, the first scene of the show, where the Demogorgon captures Will. Everyone thinks it's Vecna. I rewatched that scene so many times. It's not Vecna. You can literally see the flower head, and I don't think that the Duffer Brothers planned Vecna since the start. I think that he was a season 4 invention. He'd never really been thought of before. But in with The Lost Brother, I think that the character of Henry was thought of and created in that moment because it went so far that they thought that it was going to be a brother. So my guess is that they just reused the character name and maybe some of the ideas, like maybe he was 1 and stuff like that. But something that really interests me, this was placed as the last episode, so they must have finished everything and then they wanted to go back and do this extra episode. Probably not to anger people, because the way they did it in the actual show with having a giant plot twist and then just an episode that had nothing to do with it, and then the next episode continued it. This was at the end of the episode, or the end of the season, so I'm kind of thinking maybe that the brother might have came back and maybe helped them in the end. I don't know, that's how I think of it, because I highly doubt that they would have put that separate episode at the end of the season, but that's what it really looks like. So I think with this, that maybe this lost brother, I think it might be Henry, that he was, that he would help them in the end, and he would be a good character, but I don't know, that's just my speculation, because I think it's really weird to have it at the end of the season, and that's my thoughts on that. But that is mainly the reason why I want to make this video, The Lost Brother, because I totally think that the Duffer Brothers created the character of Henry in that moment, and it went as far where they thought that it would be a brother, as I said, and I just wonder how different it could be. If that was like the last episode and it was a brother, I wonder where that would have went. But they changed it to The Lost Sister, obviously, and put it at episode 7, but yeah. So I found this super interesting because I'm a huge Stranger Things fan for 3 years now, about 3 years now, and I'd never seen this before, and I'd never seen anyone talk about how the titles were going to be different, and possibly the show is going to be different because of stuff like The Lost Brother, who was the Lost Brother, and stuff like that. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I want to do these types of videos more, just random topics that I find super interesting. I saw this and I knew I had to instantly make a video on this, so thank you guys so much for watching this movie rating video, and I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.